So I'm trying to find some light in the end of 1984, some hope in the end of the novel. It's been said that it took O'Brien and the party so much time and so many resources to crush Winston's spirit that they couldn't possibly do that to everybody, and that there will still be people who are enemies of the party. There'll still be people striving to overthrow it and to find freedom. I don't know if that's enough for me, though. I don't know if that's enough hope at the end of this novel. So we have to kind of ask ourselves, first of all, what were we rooting for? What did we want to see happen with Winston? And I guess there are a couple possible outcomes. What ultimately I think most of us would say is we wanted him to find freedom, freedom from the party. And freedom could mean a couple different things. One, he said that freedom was the freedom to say that 2 plus 2 equals 4. We have to interpret that to mean that it's the freedom to seek truth, right? To try and find truth in the world and truth within himself. And then another freedom, of course, would be the freedom to be in love with Julia or with somebody. And ultimately to be himself in that relationship. So really, freedom is all about seeking self in this novel in pretty much every way. A sense of self, a sense of true identity. So we get to the end of the novel, and Winston has been out of the Ministry of Love for a while, and he's at the Chestnut Cafe, and he's playing chess. I want to read this passage, and then I'm going to skip forward a little bit. So he's playing chess. He put the white knight back in its place, but for the moment, he could not settle down to serious study of the chess problem. His thoughts wandered again. Almost unconsciously, he traced with his finger in the dust on the table, 2 plus 2 equals 5. So earlier he had said that freedom was the freedom to say that 2 plus 2 equals 4, this freedom to seek truth. Now he's unconsciously or almost unconsciously tracing 2 plus 2 equals 5, which of course is doublethink. And we start to see here that he's truly unconsciously starting to accept the party. He's moving into orthodoxy, and he's moving into an acceptance of their slogans and their sense of confusion. So right after this, his mind wanders, and he has this flashback to when he had seen Julia in a park. And so he's thinking about this park. He's out for a walk, and he sees her, and he puts his arm around her, and they start walking together. And so he kind of his mind wanders off to this thought of this encounter. He says he did not attempt to kiss her, nor did they speak. As they walked back across the grass, she looked directly at him for the first time. It was only a momentary glance, full of contempt and dislike. He wondered whether it was a dislike that came purely out of the past, or whether it was inspired by his bloated face and the water that the wind kept squeezing from his eyes. They sat down on 2 iron chairs, side by side, but not too close together. He saw that she was about to speak. She moved her clumsy shoe a few centimeters and deliberately crushed a twig. Her feet seemed to have grown broader, he noticed. And this is all in the time since they had been released from the Ministry of Love. And so now they're going to discuss their time in the Ministry of Love. I betrayed you, she said baldly. I betrayed you, he said. She gave him another quick look of dislike. Sometimes, she said, what they threaten you with something you can't stand up to, can't even think about. And then you say, don't do it to me, do it to someone else, do it to so-and-so. And perhaps you might pretend afterwards that it was only a trick and that you just said it to make them stop and didn't really mean it. But that isn't true. At the time when it happens, you do mean it. You think there's no way of saving yourself, and you're quite ready to save yourself that way. You want it to happen to the other person. You don't give a damn what they suffer. All you care about is yourself. All you care about is yourself, he echoed. And after that, you don't feel the same toward the other person any longer. No, he said, you don't feel the same. There did not seem to be anything more to say. The wind plastered their thin overalls against their bodies. Almost at once, it became embarrassing to sit there in silence. Besides, it was too cold to keep still. She said something about catching her tube and stood up to go. "We must meet again," he said. "Yes," she said, "we must meet again." So then he follows her for a distance, and he's kind of like half-heartedly following behind her. And then he just kind of gives up. He's sort of trying to stay with her, but then eventually just kind of mingles into the crowd, and he gives up on it. So he thinks about that he did mean it. He did mean that he loved her when he told her that before. And the tears start to well up in his eyes. A passing waiter noticed that his glass was empty and came back with the gin bottle. So he's just kind of on a steady stream of gin at this point, in this kind of half-drunk state, having these thoughts. And then his mind wanders to his work, since he's left the Ministry of Love. But then we go back to his childhood, right? And all throughout the book, we've been returning to these memories of his childhood. And it's been these memories that, in my mind, have really been propelling him forward in his challenging of the party and his challenging of orthodoxy and his fight against Big Brother. It's been these memories of his past and these dreams that he's been having about his past and his family, and the sense that they were stolen from him by the party. And these memories have been bubbling back up to the surface and kind of pushing him forward. So as he's sitting here thinking about this chess game, his interest flagged again. He drank another mouthful of gin, picked up the white knight, and made a tentative move. Check. But it was evidently not the right move because, uncalled, the memory floated into his mind. He saw a candlelit room with a vast white counterpaned bed, and himself, a boy of 9 or 10, sitting on the floor, shaking a dice box and laughing excitedly. His mother was sitting opposite him and also laughing. It must have been about a month before she disappeared. It was a moment of reconciliation when the nagging hunger in his belly was forgotten and his earlier affection for her had temporarily revived. He remembered the day well, a pelting, drenching day when the water streamed down the window pane, and the light indoors was too dull to read by. The boredom of the children in the dark, cramped bedroom became unbearable. Winston whined and grizzled, made futile demands for food, fretted about the room, pulling everything out of place and kicking the wainscoting until the neighbors banged on the wall, while the younger child wailed intermittently. So Winston constantly he's often thinking about what a brat he was and how mean he was to his mother and to his baby sister. And that's kind of where we're at in this memory at this point, but it's about to change, and we're about to see some light in this memory. In the end, his mother said, "Now be good, and I'll buy you a toy. A lovely toy, you'll love it." And then she had gone out in the rain to a little general shop which was still sporadically open nearby. It came back with a cardboard box containing an outfit of snakes and ladders. He could still remember the smell of the damp cardboard. It was a miserable outfit. The board was cracked, and the tiny wooden dice were so ill-cut that they would hardly lie on their sides. Winston looked at the thing sulkily and without interest. But then his mother lit a piece of candle, and they sat down on the floor to play. Soon he was wildly excited and shouting with laughter as the tiddlywinks climbed hopefully up the ladders and came slithering down the snakes again, almost to the starting point. They played 8 games, winning 4 each. His tiny sister, too young to understand what the game was about, had sat propped up against the bolster, laughing because the others were laughing. For a whole afternoon they had been happy together, as in his earlier childhood. He pushed the picture out of his mind. It was a false memory. He was troubled by false memories occasionally. They did not matter so long as one knew them for what they were. Some things had happened, other things had not happened. He turned back to the chessboard and he picked up a white knight again. Almost in the same instant, it dropped onto the board with a clatter, and he started as though a pin had run into him. Well, so this is the really sad part to me. This is where 2 plus 2 is really beginning to equal 5 for Winston. this truth that he's been seeking from his childhood, like this understanding of what happened to his mother, this understanding of who he really was, and who he could have been without the party, has been an obsession for him throughout the book. And now he seems to really be accepting that it's a false memory, it's a false pursuit, in even trying to find truth or identity of his own. And this, as he's pushing these happy memories of his childhood out and just accepting, the propaganda of the party, that's the really sad one to me. Even sadder than the meeting with Julia, that last meeting, which was pretty pathetic. This pushing of his memories out, and this questioning and doubting of his very history and his very personality is really, really sad. So then the telescreen comes on, and there's this propaganda about victory. And, it's shouting, vast strategic maneuver, perfect coordination, utter rout, this victory in war, right? 500,000 prisoners, complete demoralization, control of the whole of Africa, bring the war within measurable distance of its end. Victory, greatest victory in human history. Victory, victory, victory. And as he's hearing this, instead of challenging it in his mind, which he's done throughout the novel, instead, under the table, Winston's feet made convulsive movements. He had not stirred from his seat, but in his mind he was running, swiftly running. He was with the crowds outside, cheering himself deaf. So this is, again, in his subconscious, in his unconscious, in his newfound sense of orthodoxy, he's running with the crowds in his mind. And again, kind of this new patriotism toward Big Brother that he's found, toward Oceania. He looked up again at the portrait of Big Brother, the colossus that bestrode the world, the rock against which hordes of Asia dashed themselves in vain. He thought how 10 minutes ago, yes, only 10 minutes, there had been still equivocation in his heart, and he wondered whether the news from the front would be victory or defeat. It was more than a Eurasian army that had perished. Much more had changed in him since the first day at the Ministry of Love. But the final, indispensable, healing change had never happened until this moment. The voice from the telescreen was still pouring forth a tale of prisoners and booty and slaughter, but the shouting outside had died down a little. The waiters were turning back to their work. One of them approached with the gin bottle. Winston, sitting in a blissful dream, paid no attention as his glass was filled up. He was not running or cheering any longer. He was back in the Ministry of Love, with everything forgiven, his soul white as snow. He was in the public dock, confessing everything, implicating everybody. He was walking down the white-tiled corridor with the feeling of walking in sunlight, and an armed guard at his back. The long-hoped-for bullet was entering his brain. There's the metaphorical bullet entering his brain. Now, the bullet entering his brain, I guess I interpret that to mean his self, his consciousness is being obliterated by this metaphorical bullet that, I guess is representative of the party and of orthodoxy. So the bullet is orthodoxy, his brain, his consciousness, his personality, his sense of self. It's hard for me to reconcile this, though, when I think about how he and Julia had talked about wanting to save themselves, right? Like you would do anything to save yourself at the moment of pain, at the moment of torture in the Ministry of Love. And yet, here he is accepting his annihilation of self, right? At the end, he gazed up at the enormous face, 40 years it had taken for him to learn what kind of smile was hidden beneath the dark mustache. Oh, cruel, needless misunderstanding. Oh, stubborn, self-willed exile from the loving breast. 2 gin-scented tears trickled down the side of his nose. But it was all right. Everything was all right. The struggle was finished. He had won the victory. over himself. He loved Big Brother. The end. I guess I'd like to hear what you all have to say about the end of this. Try to convince me, if you can, that there's some hope there. Try to convince me that there's a moral. Remember, we're not talking about a theme here. We'll talk about themes in other ways. We're talking about a moral. Is there a lesson? Or is this just nihilism, like a post-World War II nihilistic, everything is ruined kind of perspective? Or is there hope? Is there some sense of possibility left after, for Winston, for Julia, for Oceania, any kind of light in 1984?